Hello, my name is Anders Eriksson and I am Software Manager at Detectus. In this video I will talk about the settings and features on the Config tab in Detectus Scanner software. I have my Config tab opened here, so let's start with the Spectrum Analyzer settings. As you can see, we have drivers for most common spectrum analyzers. Select the driver that corresponds to your spectrum analyzer. If you can't find your instrument in the list, then talk to your local supplier. There may be a closely related driver that works. We have a few settings predefined, but of course you can make your own. The 4 predefined settings are write protected, so you can't change those, but you can save a setting under a different name and then change whatever you want. Looking at the details of the settings, you can see this is just basic spectrum analyzer settings, so I will not go into details about those. This upper part contains settings that are valid for all measurements, while the lower part here is divided between the wideband measurements pre-scan and multiscan and the narrowband measurements scan and EMC over time. I will explain more about the different measurements in another video. To make a new setting, just type in a different name here and then click Save. Moving on to probe settings. We have a few probe models predefined, but if you know the characteristics of your probe, you can easily type in the correction factors for it. Don't worry if you don't have correction factors for your probe. Probe 0 dB will probably work just fine for relative measurements. These values are the distances from where the limiting position switch is activated to the position where the probe tip is centered above coordinates x0, y0. Remember, the origin offset values should never be 0 or even close to 0. The calibration procedure is covered in detail in another video, so let's move on to the communication settings. This dialog will look differently depending on if the driver is a VESA driver or a pure GPIB driver. This is the look of a pure GPIB driver. The board ID is almost always 0. Only if you have more than one GPIB adapter installed, you will have to make sure to pick the correct one. Here you type in the GPIB address of your spectrum analyzer. The timeout should be clearly longer than the sweep time of the spectrum analyzer to avoid timeout problems. Let's change to a VESA driver and see what that looks like. Instead of the GPIB address, we have an instrument ID. The instrument ID can identify an instrument connected using GPIB, USB, or Ethernet. But first, if you haven't done this already, the instrument has to be added to the database in National Instruments MAX software. As an example, I will show you how to add a spectrum analyzer that is connected to the same network as my PC. Start National Instruments MAX. Then open Devices and Interfaces and select Network Devices. Click Add Network Device. Select VESA TCP/IP resources. Let's try to auto-detect. It normally works, but if it doesn't, then we have to type in the IP address manually. Go ahead and click Next. Our instrument showed up in the list and we can just click Finish. Once this procedure in National Instruments MAX is done, you will not need to do it again unless you change the IP address of your instrument. Now we can close National Instruments MAX and go back to the Detectus software. Click on Search for Instruments. Make sure LAN is selected and then click Search. Our instrument shows up and we can select it. Click Choose Selected Instrument and Close. Click Save and then Close. The procedure is pretty much the same if you use a VESA driver with GPIB or USB. One thing to keep in mind: This procedure for connecting an Ethernet instrument works if you are connected to a network with a router or DHCP server that handles IP addresses. So this procedure does not apply if you just connect a network cable between the PC and the spectrum analyzer. You can do that too, but it is a bit more complicated. The procedure for that can be found in the printed or PDF manual for DSS. Let's move on to scanner settings. We have several scanner models, so make sure to pick the correct driver. Click the Edit button to show the settings dialog. This dialog will look differently depending on the scanner model and if the driver is an RS-232 or an Ethernet or LAN driver. This is an Ethernet driver, so our communication settings are IP addresses. We need the address of the scanner and the address of our PC. You can type in the addresses manually if you know them, or you can search for them on the local subnet. I have a scanner connected to my office network, so let's try and search for it. Click Search again. As you can see, I found the scanner twice. That is because my PC is connected to the office network with both Wi-Fi and cable. I want to use the cable because it feels more reliable, but I don't know which of these local addresses is the cable, so I open the Network and Sharing Center. I click on my cable network and then click Information. Now I can see that the 115 address belongs to my cable network. Let's close all this stuff. I select my cable network with address ending with 115 and then click Choose Selected Instrument and Close. Now the IP addresses are filled in. The heat calibration gain and offset are for calibrating the temperature reading of the infrared probe. The procedure for this can be found in the printed or PDF manual. Use hold on Z-axis only if you have a very heavy probe. This would be to prevent the heavy probe from sliding down during long measurements. Okay, we are done here, so let's save and close this dialog box. The Reset button. Click here to reset the scanner and align the probe to the origin of coordinates. The scanner will move towards the origin of coordinates until the limit switch is activated, and then it moves back the distance entered in the origin offset values of the probe settings. The calibration procedure is covered in another video, so I will not go into details about that here. Limit line settings. A limit line is made up of pairs of frequencies and amplitudes and can be shown on the View Prescan tab. I will talk more about this in the video covering the View Prescan tab. We have to break now, but there is a part 2 to this video where I will show you the rest of the features on the Config tab. Thank you for taking your time to watch this video. I hope you found it useful. You will find part 2 and more tutorials on Detectus.com and on YouTube.